Imagine you are a Japanese soldier in 1945 lost on a remote Pacific island. You've been starving for months, not just experiencing discomfort, but feeling your body, in a desperate attempt to survive, initiate autophagy, consuming itself. Your skin, dry as parchment, stretched over your bones, and an icy void constantly rumbled in your stomach. Your last bowl of watery rice was 3 days ago. In this hungry, ringing reality, your mind clings to one thing, an idea. The idea that you are a warrior of spirit, an heir to the samurai, and your enemy, the American, is a soft, materialistic barbarian. Propaganda blaring from crackling loudspeakers tells you that all of America is exhausted by the war, that they are giving their last efforts. And you believe it. You must believe it. Otherwise all this hell, all these sacrifices are meaningless. Then you are captured. You expect torture, humiliation, ritualistic cruelty. You prepare to grit your teeth and die with dignity. But instead, they feed you. They feed you until you are full, 3 times a day. Hot meals. And it is this act which should have been salvation that breaks you from within. Not pain, not interrogations, but what psychologists would later call the paradox of abundance. Archival reports from American camps and piercing diaries of prisoners tell the same shocking story. Japanese soldiers, raised on the Bushido code, where self-restraint is valor and wastefulness a sin, were not broken by American weapons. They were broken by an abundance of food, an abundance that seemed not just strange or unfair. In their frame of reference, it was criminal. It was an insult to the very essence of their struggle. By the end of this story, you will understand how an uneaten beef steak, carelessly thrown into a trash can, became an invisible psychological weapon, a weapon that no one intentionally created, but which struck more precisely than bullets and shells. You will learn how the sight of ordinary food waste could trigger a cascading collapse of the will to fight in warriors whose spirit was considered indomitable. This is not a story about a battle of armies, tanks, and ships. It is a story about a battle of worldviews that unfolded with a deafening crash beside an ordinary trash can. And you will understand how easy it is to break a person if you strike not at their body, but at their perception of the world. To grasp the scale of this internal explosion, we must look into the mind of our hypothetical hero. Let's call him Soitiro. From childhood, his brain was imprinted with a simple idea. The material is contemptible, wealth is weakness, comfort is decay, true strength resides only in the spirit, in the immaterial. He was raised on the iron canons of the Bushido code, where death in battle is not a tragedy but the pinnacle of service, an aesthetically perfect end. To die for the emperor, for the nation, for the very idea of a great Japan, this was the sole purpose. And to be captured, that was absolute shame. That was Haji, a state more terrible than the most agonizing death itself. His entire being was forged from abstract yet indomitable values, duty, honor, and self-sacrifice. This mechanism of ascetic conditioning worked flawlessly. The Bushido ideology and the concept of Gaiman, stoic endurance, created soldiers capable of enduring inhuman deprivation. Understand, for them, any physical suffering only strengthened the spirit. It proved its superiority over the mortal flesh. Endurance was the highest virtue. A soldier who could longer tolerate hunger, pain, and fatigue was objectively stronger than one who was simply better armed. And that is why they perceived comfort and abundance not merely as something alien. No, it was a symptom of the enemy's fundamental spiritual weakness. But within this ironclad ideology lay one critical vulnerability, one blind spot. It created incredibly resilient warriors, but left them utterly defenseless against something their value system could neither explain nor process. It taught them that the strength of spirit always triumphs over the power of matter. Always. And they were completely unprepared for a clash with a reality where matter possessed such excessive, careless power that it simply rendered spirit worthless. Think about it. What if the enemy had so much of everything that they didn't even need to exert their spirit to win? This spiritual warrior, Soitiro, was ready to die. He was ready to fight demons of flesh and blood. But he was utterly unprepared for his main enemy, his betrayer, not to be an American Marine with a rifle, but his own perpetually hungry stomach, a biological traitor that would destroy the fortress of his spirit from within. Now let's transport ourselves to the front several months before his capture. Imagine that hunger. It's not the feeling you get when you've skipped lunch. It's a constant low rumble in your stomach that never goes quiet. It becomes the background of your life. Soitiro and his comrades learned to share one can of fish among 10. They weren't just eating, they were performing a ritual, slowly savouring each bite, then licking the remnants of sauce from the sharp tin lid. They learned to see divine value in every grain of rice that accidentally fell into the mud. Hunger is not just a physical state, it's an altered state of consciousness. It sharpens hearing to a ringing in the ears, makes you value the small things, and cuts away everything superfluous, thoughts of home, fear of death. Only one task remains: survive until the next handful of rice. Hunger becomes the ultimate measure of strength. The one who endures without showing weakness is a true warrior. The one who complains is already dead. And now dry, merciless figures from military archives. By 1945, a Japanese soldier's rice ration on the front lines could shrink to 300 grams a day. That's just over 1,000 kilocalories, barely enough energy to keep your heart beating if you lay motionless. But they weren't lying still. At the same time, the standard American soldier's diet, according to US Army regulations, exceeded 4,000 kilocalories. Think about that number. 4,000. This wasn't just a survival ration, it was fuel for a superhuman. It included not only bread and canned goods, but also a daily portion of meat, butter, jam and cigarettes. This wasn't just a difference in supply, it was a chasm between a world of slow fading and a world of excessive, almost indecent energy. But how could Soichiro fight, knowing this? He didn't know. The command told him and his comrades, endure, because the enemy suffers just as you do. It's hard for us, but it's not easy for them either. Their supply lines are stretched across the ocean. All of America is starving for the war. Their economy is cracking. And the high, this necessary psychological placebo, worked flawlessly. It turned their suffering into valor. It created the illusion of an equal struggle, a battle of spirit against spirit, will against will. They sincerely believed that on the other side of the front sat an equally hungry, exhausted soldier. A soldier who was simply morally weaker than them. And they would win. They would definitely win. But it wasn't just about calories and propaganda. That's all a superficial layer. Beneath it lay something far deeper. It was about the very attitude towards food. An attitude that had been woven into the cultural code of the Japanese nation for 1,000 years. And to describe this attitude, this sacred reverence for food, there is one short but absolutely comprehensive word. Mottainai. Imagine this scene. Little Soitiro sits at a low table, his palms feeling the smooth living warmth of cedar wood. Before him, a lacquered bowl, heavy and warm with freshly cooked rice. His grandmother, without raising her voice, speaks words that will be etched into his memory forever. Eat every last grain. 7 deities of luck live in each grain of rice. And for him, this isn't a fairy tale. It's a physical law of the universe. To throw away food isn't just a show ingratitude. It means consciously insulting the farmer's labour, the mercy of nature, and the gods themselves. It's a sin. It's an invitation to misfortune into one's home. It's a deep, almost genetic conviction, absorbed not with mother's milk, but with every grain of rice. This feeling is Mottainai, a word almost impossible to translate. It's not frugality, not thrift. Mottainai is a deep, piercing pain at the sight of any wasted essence. Time, resources, life, and, first and foremost, food. It's a philosophy permeating the entire Shinto culture, which teaches everything in the world is interconnected and filled with divine energy. Kami lives in a rock, in a river, in a warrior's sword, and in a grain of rice. And by discarding something valuable, you don't just create trash, you sever this sacred connection. You commit an act of disrespect towards creation itself, you leave an ugly hole in it, and here, in this attitude, lies an unfathomable canyon between two worlds. For a Westerner, especially an American raised in a culture of abundance and disposability, discarded food is an annoyance, an economic loss, a reason to sigh, what a shame it went bad. But nothing more. For Soitiro, it was sacrilege, an act of vandalism against life itself. It was akin to seeing the enemy take a sacred scroll from your ancestor's temple to light a cigarette with it. It wasn't just an insult to his gods. It was a personal corrosive humiliation of all his inhuman suffering. It devalued every second of his hunger. And now that we understand the mind of this warrior, feel the phantom pain of his empty stomach, sense the soul-crushing weight of his culture. We are ready to witness the scene by an ordinary trash can that, with one careless flick of the wrist, will detonate all this explosive material. At prisoner of war camp on Guam, Soitiro stands by the fence. His stomach no longer screams with hunger, it just aches with a dull, familiar pain. And then he sees him. An American guard, let's call him John. A young man sitting on an overturned crate lazily eating. On his metal plate lies something from another world. A huge, thick, perfectly grilled beefsteak with dark grill marks. A piece of meat the size of Soitiro's 2 palms. And the smell! God, that smell of roasted fat, forgotten, almost mythical, reaches even here, causing an involuntary, humiliating spasm in his throat. Now let's look at the same scene through John's eyes. For him, it's just lunch. A regular Tuesday lunch. He takes a bite, chews lazily, takes another bite. Maybe the steak is a little tough, or perhaps he's just not hungry anymore. The heat has made him sluggish. He looks at his plate, where a large, better half of this luxurious piece of meat remains. He shrugs. It's just food. There's plenty of it. There's always plenty of it. He stands up, walks to the metal trash can, and with the words, "I'm full," with a dull, wet thud, he throws away an almost whole steak. Remember that sound, because for Soitiro, at that moment, the world freezes. The sound disappears, as if he's been deafened by an explosion. It's not food that flies into the trash can, it's his faith. It's months of hunger on the front. It's the lives of his comrades who died from exhaustion and beriberi. Everything he suffered for, his ability to endure, his gammon, is devalued by one lazy, thoughtless gesture. One American just threw away more energy than his entire squad received for a day. An icy shiver runs through his body. A taste of ash appears in his mouth. This careless toss wasn't just an insult, it was the sound of a gunshot. The sound of a trigger being pulled that initiated a chain reaction of psychological disintegration. A complete and irreversible collapse of his entire worldview. Because at that moment, Soitiro understood something absolutely terrifying. He understood that Japan was not fighting an army of men. It was fighting a civilization, an industrial and agricultural power of such magnitude that it could afford to throw away into the trash what for him was life itself. This was a war that could not be won by spirit, because spirit here simply had no meaning. It was a battle not of will, but of factories, and that battle was lost even before the first shot was fired. He stands, rooted to the spot. The camp noise recedes, turning into a low-frequency, oppressive hum. In his mind, brighter than any memory, there is only one image, an almost whole, glistening piece of meat flying into the trash. He tries to remember the last time he ate real meat, but his memory drowns in endless days of watery weed stew. At first, his brain responds with a defense mechanism. It is a trick. Propaganda. They want to break us, to show us fake abundance. But the Americans face it. There was nothing in it. No gloating, no malice. Only the fleeting annoyance of a full man who couldn't finish his portion. And then denial gives way to a cold realization. This isn't a trick. It's the truth. Everything his command had told him, everything he had believed, it was all a monumental lie. We were lied to. At this moment, what military psychologists would call a cascading cognitive collapse is triggered in the soldier's mind. These are no longer emotions. This is the merciless, cold mathematics of defeat. Thesis 1, a common guard, the lowest rank, can afford to throw away an almost untouched beefsteak. Argument, therefore, such steaks are not a luxury or a valuable item for them. They are commonplace. A statistical norm. The conclusion which pierces the brain like a red-hot bayonet. If this is the ration of a simple soldier, what is the supply like for their marines? How much aviation fuel do they have? How many phosphorus shells? We are fighting, giving our last. Our mothers give rice to the front, leaving themselves only bran. We are fighting on the verge of starvation. And they are fighting with surpluses. And this realization kills morale more terribly than a bullet, because it exposes the absolute monstrous asymmetry of the war. For Japan, the war was a total exertion of the entire national organism. Every citizen, from schoolchild to elder, was a cog in a single machine. The entire nation was mobilized for one goal, victory or an honorable death. And for America, war was only a part of their life. A huge, tragic part, but just a part. While their soldiers fought, their factories in Detroit were developing new models of civilian cars. Their movie studios in Hollywood were making musicals. Their farms produced so much food that its surpluses became a problem. Japan staked its entire existence. America staked only a fraction of its colossal potential. And that fraction turned out to be more than everything Japan had. How can one win such a war? The answer comes by itself, cold and final. You can't. But it wasn't just the belief in victory that crumbled. That would be too simple. Along with it, with the sound of a breaking spine, something far more important collapsed. The very foundation upon which all hatred, all fury, and all will to resist rested. The image of the enemy crumbled. Soitiro looks at the guard, trying to force the propaganda stencil onto his face. He searches for the demon in him, that long-nosed Kichiku Beye, the American-British devil with horns and fangs who sneered at him from posters in his home village. He stares, desperately trying to discern even a shadow of innate cruelty, animalistic malice, imperial hatred. But none of it is there. He sees an ordinary guy, maybe a little older than himself, a guy with traces of fatigue under his eyes, who might be thinking about home somewhere in Ohio, about a girlfriend, about the last baseball game. A guy who is simply full, and this defending, impenetrable ordinariness is the most terrifying thing. You can hate a demon, you can fight a demon to your last breath, but what do you do with an ordinary well-fed guy who doesn't even realize what a metaphysical crime he has just committed? Any war propaganda is built on dehumanization. The enemy must not be a human, but a monster. They must be hated, despised, destroyed without reflection. Japanese propaganda depicted Americans as soft yet cruel barbarians. And now this carefully constructed image collides with reality with a deafening crash. How can one hate someone whose main strength is not cruelty, but an incomprehensible, almost divine abundance? Primary emotions, anger, and resentment are quickly replaced by a state that psychologists call the effect of devaluing one's own suffering. A stupor sets in. The entire system of coordinates where we are the suffering heroes and they are the evil barbarians breaks down. The enemy ceases to be an enemy in the usual sense. He becomes something like a geological force, indestructible, impersonal, and utterly indifferent. And here is the main unthinkable paradox. It turned out that the Americans' carefree attitude and everyday wastefulness became a more powerful psychological weapon than their aircraft carriers and B-29 strategic bombers. Why? Because cruelty can be met with fury, violence with a readiness for an honourable death. The enemy's hatred only strengthens your own spirit and faith in the righteousness of your cause. It provides fuel for resistance. But how can you respond when you see not hatred, but indifferent, almost bored power? When your suffering, your hunger, your sacrifices are merely a statistical error for the enemy, a backdrop to their well-fed life. Such abundance doesn't provoke fury. It disarms. It burns the soul to ashes, leaving only cinders. And this devastation, this complete nullification of all previous beliefs, like formatting a hard drive, leads to the last, quietest and most terrifying stage, the internal, unconditional surrender of the spirit. The story of the stake doesn't remain Soitiro's personal trauma. It spreads through the barracks like smoke seeping through cracks in the floorboards. It's passed in hushed whispers from one emaciated prisoner to another during evening roll call. And this news acts like a neurotoxin, like a virus specifically targeting the centre of will. Guards in the camp, as declassified reports indicate, began to notice strange changes. The piercing, unyielding defiance drained from the Japanese soldiers' eyes. The silent iron pride vanished. The prisoners became quieter, more obedient. Their movements slowed, lost their sharpness. This was collective apathy. They still followed orders, but now it was not suppressed resistance, but a mechanical, spiritless existence. No longer were there soldiers of the great Japanese Empire. There were simply broken, hollowed-out men. It's important to understand, this psychological break, this ideological collapse, is not merely a decline in morale. It is not depression. It is a complete nullification of the entire value system, the entire framework of beliefs upon which the individual was built. Imagine that everything you believed in turned out to be not just a mistake, but a cynical lie. The belief in the Emperor's divinity, the belief in the invincibility of the Yamato spirit, the belief that your sacrifices had a higher sacred meaning. A single discarded stake erases all of this with the mercilessness of sandpaper. It proves that spirit is powerless against matter if its volume exceeds a critical mass, that sacrifices were in vain, that the enemy is not a demon, When this system collapses, nothing remains in the soul, a ringing, vacuum-like emptiness. And here is the most shocking detail from the archival reports. It was after such seemingly mundane incidents that many of the most unyielding, fanatical prisoners began to actively cooperate with the American administration. This was not betrayal. They were not tortured. They were not threatened. They did it because their own reality had been completely destroyed. Their world, their beliefs, their country, all had turned to radioactive ash. And in this existential void, they desperately needed a new frame of reference, a new functioning reality to which they could belong, even if it was the reality of yesterday's enemy, just to feel solid ground beneath their feet again, instead of an abyss. Thus, the stake in the trash can became the final irrefutable evidence in the court of history. The war was lost, and the decisive defeat was not dealt on the scorched volcanic sands of Iwo Jima or in the bloody ravines of Okinawa. It was dealt on the humming assembly lines of Ford factories in Detroit, on the endless wheat fields of Kansas, and in the giant mechanized slaughterhouses of Chicago. So, let's put all the pieces of this psychological mosaic together. On one side, the Japanese soldier. His consciousness forged by centuries-old Bushido code of honor, where death is preferable to disgrace. His body pushed to the limits of physical exhaustion by months of hunger on the front, where rice rations shrank to 300 grams. His cultural code built on the deep concept of Mottainai, a sacred, almost religious dread of any wastefulness. For him, every sawa or stalk of rice is a gift from the gods and the labor of a farmer. On the other side, the American soldier, a product of the most powerful industrial and agricultural economy in human history, whose daily ration exceeded 4,000 kilocalories. For him, abundance is a natural state, the norm, not a miracle. Food is simply fuel for the body, and if the tank is full, the excess can be discarded, simply and without reflection. The scene by the trash can is not just a meeting of two people. It is a collision of two incompatible civilizational codes, two tectonic plates, two universes existing under different laws of thermodynamics. And in this collision, the universe of total economy and self-sacrifice, like an object with less mass, was destined for annihilation in the face of a universe of boundless production and consumption. Decades passed. Tokyo, Shinjuku district, late 20th century. An elderly man, Soitiro, stands before a brightly lit supermarket display, humming with refrigerators. Neon lights illuminate mountains of products. Perfectly sliced marbled steaks lie on pristine white trays under tight vacuum seals. Nearby, on the huge plasma screen, an advertisement plays silently. A happy, glossy family barbecues in their backyard. Children laugh, carelessly tossing uneaten pieces into a plastic trash can. Soichiro looks at this without horror, without the phantom pain in his empty stomach. He looks with a calm, hard-won understanding. His country lost the war, but won in economics, becoming part of the very world that once broke him, a world of abundance. And perhaps, at this very moment, looking at the screen, he truly forgave and understood that young American guard named John for the first time. He was simply full. There was no malice in it. There was only an unconscious, crushing power that could not be defeated on the battlefield. This story is not just a military episode. It is a fundamental lesson about the nature of conflict, relevant even today. It proves that the most powerful weapon is not always what explodes and leaves craters in the ground. Sometimes the most devastating weapon, the ultimate expression of soft power, is what quietly and mundanely destroys the very meaning of the struggle. Sometimes a simple, careless gesture demonstrating your overwhelming, almost indecent superiority in standard of living, in resources, in capabilities, breaks the enemy's will faster and more reliably than any atomic bomb, because it attacks not the army and navy, but the very belief in the possibility of victory. And in the end, consider for a moment putting yourself in their shoes. What is truly more terrifying in war? The direct physical cruelty of the enemy, which evokes reciprocal hatred and fury, or their silent, indifferent, almost lazy display of overwhelming, incomprehensible superiority, which evokes only helplessness. What breaks faster, a rifle butt to the face or the sight of a steak flying into the trash? Cruelty or superiority?